Hey, it's 6:30. At this time, I'd like to call the Administrative Services Committee meeting for Monday, October 15th, 2018. Please call the roll.
Counselor Corradino.
Here.
Counselor DeMassey. Here. Counselor Hill.
Here.
Counselor Tesoriero.
Here.
Counselor Wilmot.
Here.
I'd like a motion to approve the minutes of the October 1st, 2018 meeting. Counselor DeMassey, Counselor Tesoriero.
Counselor Corradino.
Yes.
Counselor DeMassey.
Yes.
Counselor Hill.
Yes.
Counselor Tesoriero.
Yes.
Counselor Wilmot.
Yes.
Is there any old business to address tonight on this committee? Seeing none, moving along to item number 1 under authorization. Nancy Stereo, Personnel Director, requests authorization for Mayor Barlow to sign an agreement for language interpreter services. Nancy, would you like to say a few words?
Probably 6 weeks ago or so, I was contacted by the rental assistance director because they had a need for a language interpreter. So from there, I went on and talked to a few other departments, and apparently there is a need citywide in all the various departments for different language interpreters. Everyone said the main language is Spanish, but we've also had requests for Russian, Chinese, and a couple of others. So I talked to Onondaga County. There's a state bid that we can sign on to with, I believe the name of the company is Language Lines. So what I'm looking for is to get the contract set up, and then it'll be billed back to each individual department as they use the services.
All right. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Could you just explain, as far as a little more details, I mean, how it operationally works? You know, if there's a police matter and they have somebody who they don't speak to, how does it actually work?
What they do is, my understanding is you would use like a speakerphone, and you would call Language Line, tell them that you need an interpreter for the Spanish language. Our employee would explain what the process is about and that they had a person that couldn't speak English or understood English well enough. So we would say we need to ask them their name, address, and some other basic information. The language interpreter would then say to the individual in the language they've requested what it is, and then the interpreter would repeat that back for our employee to record in whatever way is necessary. The other thing is in particular with the police department, if it involved taking a statement, they'll certify the statement for us. So if it has to go to court or whatever, we would have the certification for it.
So this is basically a voice system, not a visual, like on Skype or something.
They do offer Skype. They do. I don't know that I shouldn't say Skype. They do offer a visual. I'm just not sure that we would have a need for that, because part of it also is they do American Sign Language. That is part of the service that is included in this contract.
I see a question here in the front row.
I can tell you I have experience with the company she's talking about. In my second career, we used them, and it was virtually a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week service that was available. And where Spanish was the most often language that we had to find someone for, they would also find people for some pretty unusual languages that you had not heard of before. I don't know what the cost was. That was above my pay, but it was always there.
Thank you for your input. Anybody else would like to chime in? Yes, Councilor DeMassey.
I think it definitely would be an absolute necessity, especially this day and age. You have more and more where you really do need it.
Okay, very good. Anybody else? Seeing none, can I have a motion? Councilor Hill, Councilor Wilmot.
Counselor Corradino.
Yes.
Counselor DeMassey.
Yes.
Counselor Hill.
Yes.
Counselor Tesoriero.
Yes.
Counselor Wilmot.
Yes.
And we need a resolution.
Nancy? Nancy will do it. Item number 2, Randall Griffin, Fire Chief, requests permission to have Bonnet Sales and Services Incorporated to install 7 exterior doors at the East Side Fire Station per bid proposal. The Chief's not here, but I see somebody else that could speak to this.
Yes,
Chief
thank
Chago?
you. Thank you. Looking for permission to spend budgeted monies to replace 7 of the exterior doors at the East Side Fire Station. The ones that are there now are original to '84. They've corroded. They're literally starting to fall apart. So frames, doors, the whole 9 yards, including all the security that goes with it.
All right, very good. Any questions for Chief Jago? Seeing none, can I have a motion? Counsel Tesorerio, Counsel DeMassey.
Counselor Corradino.
Yes.
Counselor DeMassey.
Yes.
Counselor Hill.
Yes.
Counselor Tesorero.
Yes.
Counselor Wilmot.
Yes.
Item number 3, Randall Griffin, Fire Chief, requests permission to send one member of the Oswego Fire Department to the Fire Officer 2 class held at the New York State Academy of Fire Science. This is pretty cut and dry. We have attachments on this, but Chief, did you want to add anything?
It's just a continuing trend of junior and senior officer development. So it's one of our deputies is interested in taking the Fire Officer 2 series. So just continuing moving, and it is budgeted monies as well.
All right, very good. Any questions for the Chief? Seeing none, can I have a motion? Counselor Hill, Counselor DeMassey.
Counselor Corradino.
Yes.
Counselor DeMassey.
Yes.
Counselor Hill.
Yes.
Counselor Tesorero.
Yes.
Counselor Wilmot.
Yes.
Item number 4, Justin Rudgick, Economic Development Director, would like to discuss a proposal for the water treatment evaluation through the CDBG program. Mr. Rudgick?
Thank you, Counselor. Good evening. I'm here to really get council approval to commit the CDBG program income funds that we have in our office to do the water evaluation, which is proposed by GHD. It's one of the things that's been kind of kicking around. If you recall, last year, a year and a half ago, we had O'Brien and Gear do a preliminary evaluation of the water treatment, the water plant. And we need to do a deeper dive into the facility. So this is what that proposal is. But in order to do this proposal, we have funds from our community development office that can cover the cost of this. And so what the CDBG program income is, just so you're aware, is over the years we've applied for funding from the community development office to the state for various activities: first-time homebuyer program, housing rehab, economic development, public infrastructure. I mean, if you recall the Area 2 sewer rehab project, we got funding for first-time homebuyer again. So what happens is there's a 10-year requirement for first-time homebuyers in housing rehab, and if you maintain your home or do the work or stay in your home for that 10 years, that grant is essentially forgiven. However, the recapture, if you don't stay in your home for 10 years, it's a sliding scale. And so over the years with the first-time home buyer, you know, sometimes people don't always stay in their home the entire time. And so based on this grant of $20,000 or whatever, if they leave after 8 years, they have to pay some of that money back. So that money that comes back to our office, we've just been holding into a CDBG account for the state. The state has been changing their rules and regulations recently, and so they came up with a process that by April of 2019, the city or municipalities have to commit program income or return the entire program income back to the state. So luckily right now we're sitting on about $250,000 of program income. After April of 2019, any program income beyond $35,000 that we receive automatically has to be turned and converted back to the state. So right now we have the opportunity to essentially do a couple mini projects to help expend that money, commit that money. So the first step in this process is to identify activities that are eligible under the CDBG program and commit that. So we need a council resolution to commit that project. And by nature, it would be very similar to if we were to apply for a CFA grant. So the only difference is we're not applying, we already have the money, but we have to follow all the same process once the funds are committed. You know, such as holding a public hearing, such as making sure it's a low to moderate income area, all of those things we would do. Since the city of Oswego is identified as a low to moderate income area, the water treatment plant or water proposal covered the entire city. It's drinking water for the entire city, so thereby that project would be eligible under a CDBG activity. So all I'm trying to do right now is get your approval to move forward to have the city essentially pay for the water treatment evaluation, but essentially the city is not really paying for it because we already have the program income. So we just want to continue to move forward. My office is going to continue to work with the mayor's office and with the council to identify additional activities before April of 2019 to expend the remaining of that program income for essentially first-time home buyer, housing rehab, or economic development activities. But, you know, there's a lot of paperwork that goes into that, but it's better than for us to turn over $250,000 to the state.
Very good. Any questions for, yes, Councilor
Oh, boy.
Tesorio.
Justin, we have the Camden Group on board. Is this anything that would, I mean, are we currently doing any of this with the Camden Group as far as the treatment plant?
So GHD, so this came from Ken Schreiber with the Camden Group,
Oh, it did?
working with
Okay.
GHD to generate this proposal. So
Okay.
it came at his request. So I'm just really the funding mechanism behind that request.
Now, could this money go towards water treatment repairs if deemed
It can,
necessary?
yep.
Oh, good. Okay.
They can.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Demasi?
My biggest concern, I'm sure you already did it, but I guess I just need to hear it legally, because it's so far from, I mean, it starts out with the first-time home buyer and all that. Our attorneys have looked at all this, and we are really, it's okay to just do it without any approval process, because we have the money sitting there. We don't have to go to the state, we don't have to do anything but just come up with the projects we want to do that fit under that without getting any kind of approval or anything like that.
I mean, there is a specific process, and that's why I'm sitting here as the Economic Development Director to follow through those process. I mean, as I said, it's just like as if we were going to apply for new funding. We already have the funding, but I still have to submit all the necessary documentation and paperwork to the state for their requirements. So in order for me even come to you to ask you to commit this program income of $50,000 for the study, I have to get conditional approval from the state in order to do that. And so what happened is I get an email, I send them an email saying I'm interested in doing this type of eligible CDBG activity. They say, yep, it meets the criteria. You just need to go to the council, get council approval, and then from that process on, I follow the typical CDBG process for any funding that we would apply for. So there's 6 different activities under the CDBG program. You know, housing rehab, home ownership, public infrastructure, which is sewer repairs, sewer work, water work, economic development. So, for example, the conference center project by the Broadwell was one of the CDBG projects that we did. And planning, so we can do engineering. So the engineering proposal is a planning grant, but we also can do other things. You know, potentially maybe a traffic analysis or something of that sort. So there's a lot of activities within the CDBG program that's eligible.
It's awesome. So you answered my question, because I guess I missed where you've already asked them
Yep.
if we qualify, so the state's already, that's where I was confused.
Yep.
That's perfect. Thank you.
I wouldn't do anything without permission.
Anybody else? Yes, Councilor Hill.
How much funding remains of the original amount that we received?
I'm sorry, what's that?
How much funding remains of the original amount we received? So how much have we already committed or used?
So we have $250,000 available in program income right now.
Okay.
So we're going to commit $50,000, so we have roughly $200,000 left over in terms of a balance to commit to other CDBG eligible projects. However, since some of our previous CDBG projects are structured as a revolving loan, so for example, some of the loans will get an additional income every month of roughly $4,000 to $6,000. So after April of 2019, that $4,000 to $6,000 that we would get in program income from a revolving loan automatically have to be transferred to the state. Like they would get it. But they're given an opportunity, such as I don't know what you want to call it, a grandfather clause, if you will, to allow the municipality to take control of the program income and to be able to really essentially recycle it back into the community. So, I mean, all of this is, where it came from, it's really tough to say because it came from CDBG, which is a HUD funding source, and it's a combination of a lot of projects that we applied for. If you recall, 2 years ago we applied for and received a $400,000 housing rehab grant. We were able to spend all of that into the community, and that has a 10-year requirement, so you have to be owner-occupied and remain in a home for 10 years in order to keep that as a grant. If not, then it comes back as a repayment or a recapture, and that, let's say the recapture, you stay in the home for 9 years, and you only have 1 year, but you want to move because you got a good job someplace else, you would maybe have to pay us $2,000 of that initial $20,000 to $40,000 grant that you got. So it's been a combination of a lot of things over time. So I would say probably over the last 3 to 4 years, we've been able to amass $250,000. So I've just been kind of just holding on to it because if you really think about a larger economic development project, in order to attract somebody to increase jobs or whatever, I mean, a $20,000 grant may not necessarily do anything if you want to bring in. So I've been kind of holding it and trying to figure out a strategy to do it, but now with the state coming back with a specific time clock of April of 2019, I figured now is an opportunity, working with the Camden Group and with all the issues that we've had with our water system, we should look into that and use our resources.
All right, thank you very much. Anybody else have any questions? Seeing none, how about a motion? Councilor Hill, Councilor Tesorerio, please.
Councilor Corradino.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Tesorero.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
We need
And
a
I'll do the
resolution.
resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Rudzik. Item number 5, Mayor William J. Barlow Jr. requests that bids be sought for the following capital projects: general contracting for building repairs to Safe Haven and the theater building located at Fort Ontario Building, repairs to City Hall, and street restoration and widening to Munn Street. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. We just have a couple of projects that we'd like to set some money aside for. It's a pretty vague, it's an intentionally vague request at this time because we still have to get estimates, quotes, and obviously look for bids. But essentially what we want to do is set aside some money for some special projects that I feel we need to get done, and there's some urgency and sensitivity to time. Those projects include a new roof for the hydro dam, a new roof for the water plant. I'd like to set aside about $500,000 for City Hall restoration work, and that'll help go towards a grant that we have to match. Also, I'm constantly being lobbied for some routine maintenance and restoration efforts at the Safe Haven Museum building and the Players building, both of which the city own, over in the Fort Ontario complex. And then there's one additional project that you're familiar with, Councilor, and that's the widening of Munn Street. So really all this does, it's kind of a blanket approval for Deb to be able to go look for a bond that she'll look for, and also have permission to bid these projects.
All right,
The hydro dam roof and the water plant roof are pretty urgent. I know Bob Johnson's been lobbying me for a new roof for the dam and the water plant for about a year and a half. Year and a half ago, he brought it to me and said it was a pretty pressing matter then. So, on borrowed time for those two projects.
All right, does anybody have any questions for the mayor? I don't see any councilors, but I see one in the back corner.
Safe Haven and Theater Building. Isn't the Fort and their little company there taking over those two buildings in a couple of years?
I mean, really the only news out of that is that they're authorized to do the study.
Okay,
So-
is it that much pressing to do those two buildings if the Fort takes over?
Well, I don't know. I don't really know if if we've ever seriously discussed the Fort taking over those buildings. I think we'd have to sell them or be willing to give them up. But
I understand there's negotiations they have to go through over the next 2 or 3 years, Bill, okay?
Yeah.
But I still think that the Safe Haven and the Theater Building are going to be taken over by the Fort, okay? That's the impression I got from the king over there. Okay? And you know who I'm talking about, too, by the way.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. okay?
Maybe Kevin Hill can.
Yeah, I
Expand on that.
can speak to that. They wouldn't be taken over by the Fort. It would actually be taken over by the federal government, but they will manage it in accordance with a plan that's developed with the different organizations, and to make the sites more appealing and more likely to be included into the National Park Service, it would be good to have buildings that are in good shape so that when they come in and do their evaluations, it is something that they are willing to take on and that they're in a shape that's sustainable to make it more attractive. So.
Okay. Anybody else? I did want you to clarify one point. You said there was a sense of urgency for like the roofs for the water plants. So when would these projects primarily take place?
Well, once we get these permission to RFP and set this money aside, I don't see the project getting done by the end of the year, so my guess would be in spring to schedule the jobs for the roofing job.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Oh, yes, Councilor DeMasi.
I know I'm going to be getting all the questions coming out of this with doing stuff to those buildings in the Ponzi building down there. Is there anything moving forward with the Ponzi building that we would be doing anything scheduled work?
I think if you talk to the engineer and the folks in code, they'll say that you're looking at, 6 figures to make that place even usable. But if that's something the council wants to include in this, my priorities here are City Hall and the 2 roofs. If you guys want to play with the allocations to certain projects, add something, take away something, that's totally up to you. I just would ask that the 2 roofs stay in and City Hall work.
I see another question in the back corner, or comment.
I'm not against anybody here, but I had a walk through that building too, by the way, the Ponzi building, okay? As far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't let my kid in the building anymore. It's time to lock it up until you decide you're going to do something with it, because there's holes everywhere. I couldn't believe that squirrels have eaten through the wooden framework of the windows. I've never seen that before. The eaves have got holes. There must be a Chinese family over there growing up out there. There's a ton of them over there running around. And the basketball court, I'm not too sure what that paint is peeling. Now, I've been reassured that it's not lead-based paint, and I've been reassured there's no asbestos in the building. But as far as I'm concerned, that building's not safe. Take a look at that one pole on the side there, northwest corner. If the wind comes in pretty good, I wouldn't want to be around it. Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments? Yes, Councilor Gozik.
Yeah, just real quick, just to follow up on Councilor DeMasi's statement, and Kevin might be able to shed some light on this, but I do know like all those buildings were part of the military base expansion in 1903. I've done some research on it, and it would seem that obviously the Safe Haven Museum being of such great significance on an international, national, and statewide level, and the Oswego Players, because of the important role it plays in our arts and culture community, would obviously be top of the list. But if there is a way, I think the council should consider preserving all those buildings and not letting them go to waste, because they are 115 years old and they are part of the historic Fort Ontario grounds. And obviously the fort couldn't expand after World War II. That's when it closed. But we're lucky to have them, and I think we need to shore up all those resources and really consider like that's an important area. When people see our waterfront and see Fort Ontario, that building is an eyesore, and I've seen it for years, and it did serve a good purpose. But I think we should consider looking at the Ponzi building and the other buildings. But I'm not sure the city does own all the red buildings down there. We own all the old military buildings? Okay, I just wasn't sure, but I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in, but I would think we should consider it.
Anybody else? All right. Can I have a motion? Councilor Wilmot, Councilor DeMasi.
Councilor Corradino.
Yes.
Councilor DeMasi.
Yes.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Tesoriero.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
Item number 6, Mayor William J. Barlow, Jr. has received a proposal from Asbestos and Environmental Consulting Corporation for limited hazardous material pre-demolition surveys for properties located at 100 East 9th Street and 84 East Schuyler Street. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. If you remember last year, we teamed up with City BOCES to have their heavy equipment class come in and demolish a house over on, I think it was East Seneca Street. So we're looking to continue that partnership again this fall, looking at the month of November. And we have 4 properties that we'd like to turn over, or actually not turn over, but have them demolished between the fall and the spring. Those 4 properties are 100 East 9th Street, that's owned by the City of Oswego. 84 East Schuyler Street is owned by the City of Oswego. 139 West Bridge Street is owned by the City of Oswego, and 183 East 5th is actually owned by an individual, but it's condemned. Nobody lives in it, still dilapidated, and it's going to fall down on its own unless somebody takes care of it. So while we were doing the research on these homes and talking to city BOCES about this, conversation came up about the last home we took down and some action items and improvements that we could do to help make the process run smooth and a little more safe for everybody involved. So we actually went and tested these 4 properties for asbestos, and 2 came back as positive. So the agreement that I'm asking permission to sign and to advance funds for brings in a company called AECC Environmental Consulting, and what they do is they go in, look at the 2 buildings that tested positive, and they will provide all documentation before the demo, and they will provide air quality services during the demo itself to make sure nothing is getting to these kids that we don't want them breathing in. I think in my mind it does 2 things. Takes some liability off of the city, knowing, or I guess calms some nerves, knowing that it's done professionally and properly, and we have a hired professional doing it before we relied just on our code staff. And then number 2 is our code staff is quite swamped, and I think this just takes one, at least last time it was very time consuming, takes one thing off their plate so that we can get these kids in, out, keep them safe, and not bog down regular code operations. In the meantime, the total for this contract for the 2 properties is $7,650.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Any comments or questions for the mayor on this particular proposal from anybody? Seeing none, can I have a motion? Councilor Tesorario, Councilor Hill.
Councilor Corradino.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Tesorero.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
And we need a resolution.
And the mayor's office will provide a resolution for that. At this time, I believe that's the last item for this particular committee. Is there any old business to address? Seeing none, can I have a motion to adjourn? Councilor DeMassey, Councilor Wilmot.
Councilor Corradino.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Tesorero.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
At this time, I'd like to call the Physical Services Committee meeting for October 15, 2018 to order. Please call the roll.
Councilor Hill.
Here.
Councilor Wilmot.
Here.
Councilor DeMassey.
Here.
Councilor Gozick.
Here.
Could I please have a motion to approve the minutes of the October 1st, 2018 meeting? Councilor Wilmot, Councilor DeMassey.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes.
Councilor Gozick.
Yes.
Is there any old business to come before this committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business under communications. Item number 1, the Community Development Office received a request from the Oswego YMCA regarding the reindeer run to be held on Saturday, December 8, 2018. They're requesting road closures, no parking signs, a police escort, and police assistance for runners crossing the intersection at West 1st and Bridge Streets. This is a recurring event. Justin, would you like to speak?
Yeah, I will. Thank you. This is a reoccurring event. We've had it a couple of years now. My office is coordinated with OPD on this event, and they see no issues with the event. So, I mean, I'm just here to let you know that we coordinated with other departments that are impacted by this event, and everything was fine.
Are there any questions for Justin? Okay, could I please have a motion? Councilor Wilmot, Councilor DeMassey.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes.
Councilor Gozick.
Yes.
Item number 2, the Community Development Office received a request from Trinity Catholic School regarding the 4th Annual Trinity Turkey Trot Family Run Walk on Sunday, November 18, 2018 at 12 p.m. They're requesting a police escort. Justin?
The same thing at the previous event. It's a reoccurring event, and we coordinated with the applicable department, in this case would be OPD, and they see no issues with the request. So my recommendation is to continue to move forward.
Again, any questions for Justin? Councilor?
Not a question, just a comment. My wife and I did participate in this last year. It was the first annual, I believe, and it is in our ward, my ward, the 7th ward, and it was well-run and very professionally done, and I encourage a yes vote on this because it certainly is a good project to support. Thank you.
Great. Could I please have a motion? Councilor Gozick and Councilor DeMassey.
Counselor Hill.
Yes.
Counselor Wilmot.
Yes.
Counselor DeMassey.
Yes.
Counselor Gozick.
Yes.
Item number 3, the city attorney received a request from Oswego County Opportunities, the owner and developer of a project known as Champlain Commons, located at 172 City Line Road in the town of Scriba, seeking the review and approval of an application to connect directly into the city of Oswego sewer system pursuant to Chapter 199, Article 1 of the City Code. Kevin?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Yeah, I'm really facilitating this for Oswego County Opportunities. We have Diane Cooper-Currier, who's here, that can speak to this, as well as a representative from the engineering company. All I'll say, and it's noted on the presentation, that this would be a direct connection. This is something that's allowed in the city code. Your role, as far as the code is concerned, is to review this and then make a request to the engineering department for a report. What they'll look at is the suitability of directly tying in, whether there's capacity, and then ultimately, and maybe some other additional recommendations, and then ultimately you decide whether that occurs or not, and authorize the permitting of that direct connection. But this would be a direct customer to the city of Oswego. This is, even though the property's in the town of Scriba, this has nothing to do with it passing through a sewer district in Scriba. This is a direct connection. And the reason it's permitted is the city code allows it. If you are immediately outside the city limits and there is a connection to the sewer, you're permitted to apply. That primarily, and I'll be curious when we speak to Bobby Johnson about this, it's primarily been used for residential hookups. I'm not aware of any commercial or quasi-commercial hookups that have occurred here. This is essentially an apartment complex, 56 units, one sewer main that would be connecting and would service the entire complex. There's, I think, eight buildings, 9 with a community room. So the whole issue with pricing is another matter, and I don't know exactly how you price an apartment complex versus a single-family residence. I think I have an idea, but I'd like to talk to Mr. Johnson about that as well. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you get a report, and then it's your decision to allow the connection.
So today, as it's written, we are looking to review and approve the application, but you're saying that before we do that, we need a report from Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, so what you're right. It starts, the way the code works is the application is submitted to the Common Council. The Common Council receives it and then forwards it to the engineering department for a report. And then at that point, the report comes in and you're able to approve the application and issue a permit for the direct connection. And as part of that, the developer in this case, the apartment complex, would know what the fee is that would be established. The way that Chapter 199 reads, you're charging, it reads primarily as if it were a residential property owner, but in this case you've got, in effect, 56 units. How that breaks down by way of water usage and billing and all the rest of it, I think still needs to be worked out, but that's where I think Mr. Johnson will be instrumental, as well as our folks from Camden Group. You can give us some technical assistance on that.
So I guess I'm struggling with what our purpose is here today. If it's written that we're actually approving the application, but we're actually just approving the movement of the application to the engineering department, Where, and then there'll be a second approval after he provides the report, or will Monday's vote be the official approval of the application?
Well, it depends on how quickly Mr. Johnson can get to work. I think he's still not here, so it may take another cycle to get that approved, the final approval. But
So would your recommendation be, for process sake, to approve this today, or should we wait? I mean, I guess procedurally I'm struggling with this.
Yes, so I guess maybe the correct term would be to accept the application.
Okay,
right,
so we should
and
modify
then
the language here.
refer it to the engineering department for a report.
Okay, so we'll want to get that modified. And
Yeah.
that'll be reflected in the resolution.
I think, yeah, this is just the memo. The resolution will clarify that.
Okay. So I think before the meeting, Councilor Tesfario actually expressed some concerns over that, and we were looking for that particular information, so this answers that. So.
Great.
So I understand both Diane Cooper Courier is here from OCO and the engineer is here, so if anyone has any questions today, they're here. Councilor Gozer?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask now, Oswego County Opportunities is a non-profit, right?
Yeah.
Because he was describing it as Attorney Caracoli was describing it as a, commercial enterprise. I guess I was wondering with the 56 units, how does that, do you mind me asking, how does that work? I mean, is it, there's a apartment complex going to be, based on like people's income, and they're going to get like...
Yes, it's an affordable apartment complex. So their 56 units are based on income. Mm-hmm.
So will it be, will Oswego County Opportunities, be like the landlord, or we oversee it?
It's actually a complex structure, ownership structure, but OCO was a sponsor of this project, and we will be managing in terms of the ownership of the project as well. We are co-developers with Rochester's Cornerstone Group, which is out of Rochester, and then once it's all done and said, we will be owners, and Rochester's Cornerstone Group will be actually managing the property. That's what they do. They develop and manage these type of properties, but we retain ownership. Mm-hmm.
So just kind of, if I could ask one more question. So the company, so there are other projects like this around the state or somewhere in upstate New York?
Absolutely.
So we can look to see, okay.
Yeah. So it's called low-income housing tax credit projects, where how they get funded is, we have a variety of funding sources, but the largest is through a tax investment, an equity investor, who invests in their money into the building of these projects. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And this is David Cox from Pissarro Associates, and I messed that up, didn't I, David? And he's they're the engineering firm on the project, so if anybody has any questions relative to the engineering aspect of this.
Councilor Cordino?
Actually, I had a question for her.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe I can think of an engineering question for you.
Sure thing.
I was just wondering, I know that Housing Visions is going to be putting in some units in the Flexo Wire, and there's other people that are anticipating adding some units. Has a market study been done to see if we actually need 56 income based?
We actually started this process about 4 years ago. Did a market study then had to applied for, because you have to apply for the low-income housing tax credit, and then didn't get it the first time, didn't get it the second time, got it the third time, and each time we had to update the market study. And Justin could probably speak better to this in terms of the need in this community, in Oswego County in general, for rental units is extremely high, because the residency, if you will, or the occupancy rate is very high of the current rental units. So people can't find rental units, and particularly for individuals who are working but earn a lower income. So if you're earning $16,000 a year, the ability to pay out a lot in rent is difficult. So for market rate for a one bedroom, it's $700 and some odd a month, but the affordability of that for somebody who's not earning, working full-time but not earning enough, taxes them in terms of their rent burden. So these apartments are targeted to individuals who are working, but maybe having a lower income type of job, and so the rental rates are lower in these because of the tax credits, because of the support we get for building the project. So Housing Vision's the same thing.
All right, thank you.
But yeah, that.
And Councilor Testoria.
This is an engineering question.
Sure.
We're talking about sanitary, but what about storm runoff?
So storm is all private, handled on-site with on-site stormwater detention, so the city isn't involved in stormwater, just the sanitary.
Okay, so your retention pond is what you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay. You got a lot of parking lot there, you probably got a lot of roof area.
Yep.
It's going to be a pretty good-sized pond.
Correct.
Okay. As far as easement, as far as the city being able to get to this, is that considered or no? Who's going to be responsible for a breakage off the main? Or
all the sanitary on the property is all private. So the owner is completely responsible for maintaining, owning, replacing all that, and we are tying into the city dedicated main in the city right away. Or it's a county. The property. The line goes right down the middle of the street, so it's dual municipality.
currently, what we have now is the homeowner is responsible for the lateral. So, understandably, it would be your responsibility to the actual lateral that's installed.
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure that's clear too, because if that deems a road cut or, repair, okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Cordino.
I did have an engineering type question.
Perfect.
Give me a minute, I can come up with anything. I'm really interested in seeing what Mr. Johnson has to say, because as you were talking about these things that we're approving without basically much knowledge, and again, we're not really approving it per se, but what about if the pipe in the road is not big enough to take into account 56 more units? What is the city on the hook for? We have to put in a bigger pipe in the road because it's only a 2-foot diameter when it needs to be 3 foot. So I'm concerned about any additional costs. So I think Mr. Johnson's input is going to be critical to find out if the city has to put in any bigger infrastructure. Do you know offhand?
We talked to them when we started working on the project, because that was a major concern, and they relayed to us that there is ample capacity for us to tie into.
The pipe is big enough.
Right.
Good to know.
Someone from the public?
Mr. Chair, 2 questions. Is this a new construction?
Yes.
It's not rehabbing the buildings on the backside of the Lime Creek complex?
No.
Okay. And might water pressure be an issue, because don't you already have water pressure issues in Brittany Hill?
No.
No?
They've been corrected since the last water upgrade when they took the Riley tank down and they established a pump system. We have adequate pressure.
Water pressure considerations for that in the unit?
But
yeah, as part of the project, we have to run water calculations. So we get flow test information, determine the exact flow and pressure in the existing system, and then we model the additional flow into it to make sure that there's still adequate flow and pressures in the system, and then that gets sent to the health department for approval.
Okay, one more question. Have the contiguous Cybertown residents been involved in this discussion at all?
Yes, so that went through the whole municipal approval process with the town of Scriba, with public hearings and all that, and that has all been approved.
Councilor Testoria.
To answer one of your questions, Scriba has its own water district, completely separate from the city of Oswego. So their water is pumped, elevated tanks, they take care of their own. Wouldn't really affect anything on the other side of City Line Road. Thank you.
And are there any revenue estimates for the city, like what this may generate?
Again, I'm not, the revenue would be that generated from the sewer tax. I don't know.
Okay.
That's part of what I'd like to sit down and talk to Mr. Johnson about. and what the formula would be for actually taxing the property owner. It's clearly a tax. It's a sewer tax. They're not exempt from those special improvement taxes. So I just don't. I don't know.
Any other questions?
I guess I'd just add two things. As Mr. Cox said, I am aware that, the engineer to engineer, there's been talks going on for some time. So I don't know how much more Mr. Johnson, how much more information he's going to need before he can give you a report, but, we'll wait to hear from him. And then secondly, regarding the need, the housing need, unfortunately, there's a significant need, as we all know here, and at least from the statistics I've seen, the amount of housing that we have, even new housing, and keep in mind these are multi-million-dollar projects. The same funding pool that this project is receiving money from, our Harbor View Square down at the Flexowire site received that a pot of money from that same state agency, HCR. That's a $22 million development project. A lot of the same housing tax credits are going to be used for that. Market rate plus affordable housing. This is primarily affordable housing, but still a multi-million-dollar project. That's a lot of good quality housing for a very significant portion of our population that really needs it, and we can argue deserves it. I think rightly so. And even then, that's only scratching the surface of what's needed. Fortunately, we have additional housing projects that are on the drawing block, and perhaps some more news about that in the next few months. But this community is fortunate that that the state and others, developers, are stepping up and investing money in our community to address housing across the board, and this is certainly a set of our population that needs it desperately.
Can I just add a comment to that when you asked about need? Through the Lift Oswego poverty assessment that we did, one statistic that comes out pretty high is that 45% of low-income renters are spending more than 35% of their income on housing. So, the high end should be 30%, which includes utilities, rent, electricity, water, whatever. But almost half of renters who have a low income are spending more than that on their rent. And so, as a homeless service provider in Oswego County, people think of homelessness as individuals who are sleeping on the benches or under bridges. Certainly have some of that, but we have more families coming in who are working families but are underwater or above water, I don't know how you say that, in their rent costs. And so so they're having to make decisions about, do I pay my rent? Do I put food on the table for my children? Or, pay our medical bills? And so they end up in arrears with their rental costs because they just don't have the amount of money that in their pocket to pay for those rent costs because of that out of whack statistic of 45% of them are paying more than their income to rent and housing costs. So I think it's important. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, could I get a motion, please? Councilor Gozick, Councilor DeMassey.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes, to
Counselor-
forward application to engineering only.
Councilor Gozick.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there any other business to come before this committee? Seeing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Councilor DeMassey, Councilor Wilmot.
Councilor Hill.
Yes.
Councilor Wilmot.
Yes.
Councilor DeMassey.
Yes.
Councilor Gozick.
Yes.
This time, I'd like to call the Planning and Development Committee meeting October 15th, 2018.
Councilor Tesorero.
Here.
Councilor Corradino.
Here.
Councilor McBurney. Here.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the October 1st, 2018 committee meeting? Councilor McVerde, Councilor Cordino.
Counselor Testerero.
Yes.
Counselor Corradino.
Yes.
Counselor McBurdy.
Yes.
Any old business to come before this committee? I see none. We'll go to communication. Mayor William J. Barlow and Nathan Emons, Director of the Rental Assistance Program, request a public hearing and review of the proposed updated administration plan for the Rental Assistance Program. Take it, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for letting us sit in front of you, but I wanted to present this more to the public, and you guys get a chance to respond, plus Nate and I are working off some of the same notes, so it just makes it easier. What this is, it's actually a pretty exciting, I've been looking forward to presenting this because it's actually been 3 years in the making, really, since taking office. This has been an office and a project and a program that we've been trying to improve, not just the way it operates and how effective it is, but the public perception as well. When I was campaigning back in 2015, every time there was a identified troubled property in any given neighborhood, when I was walking through the neighborhoods, residents would automatically assume it was a HUD, quote, HUD home. And I've been set out to try to change that perception and actually add some facts to the conversation to demonstrate that it's not a bad office, it's not a bad service for a municipality this size to offer, and that it can be effective if it's designed to help people who truly need help, who want help, and will use the help to better themselves rather than just a government subsidized handout program. So using that mentality is really what we've had as a guiding light as we've worked to design this office. If you remember back in 2016, the HUD office was one small part of the community development office on the 3rd floor of the Conway building. Since taking over, since I took office, we made the what's the job? Inspector's job from part-time to full-time. I was thinking complaint investigator. I'm all confused. We took that job for being part-time to full-time. That was one of the changes. We since then, at the end of last year, we separated, as you know, the Community Development Office, the Economic Development Office, and the Section 8 Office. We separated the staff. We put them in 2 different buildings because they're 2 totally different offices with different priorities, different operations. There's really nothing in common between them. And I still, to this day, can't understand why. Actually, I can understand, but I'm not going to say it. It doesn't make any sense to have it a combined program, and I think in some respects our economic development program in the city was suffering for decades because the main funding source for the whole office was piggybacking off of the HUD office, and that's just a matter of fact. They were literally robbing Peter to pay Paul, using the HUD office as the piggy bank, and instead of designing an effective program that lifts people off of poverty and off of the HUD program, they were using it to fund the Economic Development Office. And that's, I said I wasn't going to say it, but then I said it. So really we set out, and that was the main goal we had, is to make it effective, change the perception. I think, I'm not sure if I'll declare mission accomplished, but I think we have changed the factual conversation that just because there's a troubled property in your neighborhood, don't automatically assume it's a HUD office where they sit home all day and don't work, because it's just not the case. And I think we're going to outline some more reforms in addition to what we did last December that will make the program even more effective in that regard. So I'll also add that the HUD office in their new location, we also have new staff. Before, Justin Rudgick was the Economic Development Director and would oversee the HUD program. That's impossible, especially when you go out and win $18 million of grant money in 2 years. You have to continue looking for grant money. You have to administer the $18 million you won, which is enough for 3 people alone. And the HUD office needs, if it's going to be effective, needs its own boss, it's someone to look over it. And it would be impossible for any one person to do that. So when we separated the office, and I don't think it broke Justin's heart to not have to be in that office anymore, but we brought in Nate Emmons, who's now the director, and he's done really a remarkable job, as is your whole staff, adjusting to the change, but diving into the program, learning the program, and teaching me more about the program. And I'm really proud of the office we have. In the 2019 city budget, the council thankfully approved $20,000 for the Workforce Development Center, so we have that room scoped out, and I think that'll be a success story in and of itself, and I'm looking forward to that. And now it's just about putting the right pieces in place to really capitalize on the resources we've given the HUD office and make sure that we're being effective with all we hope to accomplish. So back in 2017 in December, you'll remember I came through with Justin's help on the first set of what we called reforms, and that was changing the HUD office from being that handout sort of government subsidized program to a more hand-up program. And I'll mention some of the reforms that we proposed then, because we're really just building off of the reforms now. The first one was reprioritizing the ranking system used to place individuals on the program to offer priority to household with members that are working part-time or enrolled in education. And we also added in military veterans. So before these reforms, before 2017, when we issued these reforms, the priority ranking was very simple and easy to understand. It was residency preference was given to those applicants that live in the city of Oswego. So anybody could apply. You could apply if you lived in Oswego County, if you lived in Fulton, if you lived in Onondaga County, anywhere. And you could apply to be on our program, and you would essentially be placed in the second group because the only priority given was those who lived in the city and applied. So that was the order it would go. It's pretty basic, pretty open-ended. And really set no preference as to who we wanted on the program and wanted to help or could help. So we changed that in December of 2017. Instead of just that simple giving preference to those in the city, we made it so we had non-elderly working, disabled families, military veterans who live in the city of Oswego, and then we added the workforce development component asking for the minimum hours of a week being worked or enrolled in a vocational program or attending a college course. The second ranking was a multi-person family who lives in the city of Oswego with a household working part-time or enrolled in some form of educational training program. Then single healthy adults who live in the city and work or enrolled in education. Number 5 was multi-person families who live in the city. 6 was single, healthy adults who live in the city. And then the last was all non-residents outside of the city of Oswego. That was the change we made in December of 2016. The second reform in 2016 was the implementation of the housing standards, which obviously went in line with the code work we're trying to do. Before we made these changes, HUD put forth their own criteria that a municipality would use to enforce we'll call it the HUD code. And what we found was that was much more lenient than the city code. And there's no reason why somebody, just because they are receiving public assistance on the Section 8 rental assistance program, should be subject to worse conditions than the city code. I view the city code as not an impressive or demanding document. I think that's the bare minimum. And to think that just because a landlord rents to somebody on Section 8 or somebody is on Section 8, I don't think they should be subject to worse living standards, especially since the landlord's being paid with a taxpayer subsidized check. If anything, they should be held to a higher standard. So we made the city code effective to our Section 8 HUD housing code. The third reform we did was implementing the fee charged to landlords participating in the program. What we did is if a property is on a HUD voucher and it fails the required annual inspection and needs to be re-inspected, That second inspection now costs the landlord $100, and then if they fail again, every time after that, it's another $50. That, in my opinion, has proven to be effective. In 2017, we did 930 inspections. 77% of those inspections failed the first initial inspection. In 2018, we're using the same inspector. He's doing the same amount. The criteria has gotten more strict because of our code upgrade. So far this year, we've done 706 inspections. 317 have passed the initial inspection. That's 45%. That brings the fail rate for the first time down to 55%. So that tells me two things. Either landlords have gotten the message that we're taking code enforcement and the code in our HUD program more serious and following up, or they don't want to pay the $100. I happen to think it's probably a mixture of both. So we're seeing that fail rate come down. And as much as I love racking up code violations and watching landlords squirm, I like to see this fail rate come down because it means they're providing adequate conditions up front, and when they move somebody in, the apartment looks the way it should, and they know when we're coming, or when we're coming, so they're making sure they're on their game, and that saves us time in the long run and paperwork and aggravation. It makes me happy, but it's really the right thing to do for the tenant and for taxpayers who are subsidizing the rent. Those inspections, by the way, Common Council have they equal $3,700 because of the $100 fee and $50 fee after that so far this year. And the fourth reform we did last December was expanding the review of the criminal background check to prohibit individuals applying for the program. Before, you had to be convicted of a felony in the last 5 years. We brought that down to the last 3. So they were the main reforms we did in December of 2017. And really what today is establishing council approval to review this plan and move it forward through the process. This is a total comprehensive. Before, we just added these 4 reforms into our plan, made some other minor tweaks. This is the plan as it exists today. This is the plan after this comprehensive review. And this is the first complete comprehensive review since 1976. I don't like paperwork, but I happen to think a lot of the extra paper and the stack on the right is worthwhile and will hopefully help the program. So I already talked about the ranking system we implemented in December of 2017. If you can remember the ranking I gave you, this reform expands that ranking even more, and I think helps groups of people that should be included. And so it, for the most part, stays the same, but in the proposed #1 ranking, we are leaving it as families with children living in the city of Oswego or hired to work in the city of Oswego. That's one change. What we're saying is we give the preference to people living in the city of Oswego, but why not give equal preference to maybe they do not live in the city, but they work in the city. So if they're working, that's who we want on our program. We want to increase the numbers of the P1s on our program. They're the people that are meeting that work requirement. And again, they're the people that we want to help. They have children, they're a family, they're trying to make a go of it, they have a job, and they just need a little extra help to pay the rent. #2, non-elderly, non-working elderly, disabled families, military veterans who live in the city of Oswego, multi-person families who live in the city with a household member, or excuse me, yes. No, #2 is the disabilities. We added in that into P1. Families living in the city of Oswego where the head of household or spouse is a military veteran. Families living in, working, or hired to work in the city who are victims or threatened victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Remember back in the spring I did the executive order because I didn't want to wait for this annual review, so I did the executive order to make it law then. Now we're just asking the Common Council to officially put that in our plan. Part of this bullet point is actually adding in the VAWA language, which is the Violence Against Women Act. In this document we have all of the procedures, protocols, forms, emergency action items should somebody come in and bring a case to our HUD office that they need to move immediately. We have that protocol set forth in here, the language and the forms are in there. That's in large part what's responsible for the packet being a bit taller. So we're adding that group into P1. Families, and this is another big addition to P1, families that are living in a supervised, publicly or privately operated homeless shelter within the city of Oswego designated to provide temporary living arrangements, which includes transitional housing, hotels, and motels paid for by charitable organizations or by federal, state, or local government programs for low-income individuals. In short, what this says is if you can demonstrate that you're homeless and you are living in a private or public homeless shelter, you can't just be somebody on the street that you're claiming you're homeless. You've actually checked into a homeless shelter. We will place you in the P1. The criteria for that is that you can demonstrate that you're in a homeless shelter or the family's primary nighttime residence will be lost within 14 days. No subsequent residence has been identified, and there's a lack of resources or support networks, family, friends, faith-based organizations, or social networks to obtain quickly, in a reasonable time period, housing. So you have to meet all of that criteria to actually be placed. And then number two, this for the most part stays the same as the reforms we did back in December. Families living in the city of Oswego who are elderly families or disabled with children and the head of households not working. Other families living and working or are hired to work in the city. Other families in the city that are not working or hired in the city. And then last, families not living, working, or hired to work in the city of Oswego. That we have to leave on there by law, unfortunately. So that really is one main reform why we wanted to talk about this tonight, is expanding the ranking system that we already substantially changed last December. A couple other edits that I'm proud of and happy to talk about, and then I'll turn it over to Nate to talk about some more boring and more detailed stuff. I'll really highlight two of them. One is the minimum rent requirement. Right now, if you come to our HUD office, and if you are able-bodied, you appear to be able-bodied, you can work, you can make an income, we do not require any sort of minimum rent in our program. So you literally can have somebody, well, there's no excuse why they're not working, and they can still get a 100% paid for rent amount. What we're saying is if you do not have a physical limitation and you can clearly work, you can get on the program, you can have subsidized rent, but we are going to mandate a minimum rent for every unit of $50. It's not a lot of money. The average price that our HUD office pays out is about $700 a unit. So I don't personally think asking somebody who can clearly work to pay $50 while our office pays the other $650 is unreasonable. It allows us to go further with the program and help people who actually need it. I think if they are mandated to pay that minimum rent, it puts a little skin in the game on their part, and they have to realize that they have to pay at least a little bit to live there and can't rely on our program to do it all on our own. And I really don't think it's a tall order to say you can have, if this apartment costs $600, $700, the office will subsidize $550 or $650 if you pay your share, which is $50, and that's the minimum. Most of the income thresholds are done by a formula based on the income received. So this takes people who are receiving no income. It's either 100% public subsidy to begin with, and in other ways, food stamps, welfare, whatever, and requires them to pay the $50. I don't think it's unreasonable, and I think it is actually quite responsible for our program to do that, and tries to encourage people to at least go look for a job so you can pay that minimum. And of course, just an asterisk next to that, if you can, we have criteria built into the plan where if you, let's say you all of a sudden lost your job, or you're in a situation that you didn't expect, and it's an emergency, we have in there where you can file for a temporary hardship, and what that'll do is we can consider and waive the minimum rent for 1 to 4 months based on the severity of your temporary hardship, and waive that $50 fee until you overcome the hardship or at least get back stable, and then we can implement the $50 fee. This next item is probably the item I'm most looking forward to implement, and that is the annual interim re-exam and adjustment. What this does, right now, HUD requires you to, anytime, if you're working on the HUD program, HUD requires you to notify the local office, which is our office, right away, anytime your income changes. And what we find is, let's say somebody's working at a fast food restaurant, a Dunkin' Donuts or something. If they get any change in their income at all, whether it's the hourly rate or a salary, they have to immediately report that to the HUD office. How it exists now is once that report comes in, HUD, because your assistance is based on your income, HUD goes in and readjusts the amount of subsidy you receive on your HUD voucher. Well, if you think about it, if you're working at Dunkin' Donuts and get a raise, you're almost going to be punished, and the raise will be negated once you report, and we adjust your voucher amount. So what we're saying is you still have to report, or, you know, heaven forbid if you actually have some ambition and go get a second job, you know, you really have to make some money at the second job to make it worth your time. We want to encourage people to work and go look for a job. And it just doesn't make any sense to ask them to put in a lot more hours only to have their assistance immediately increase. What we're saying is you still have to report it right away, but instead of the City of Oswego HUD office immediately adjusting your HUD voucher, which if you get a job or get more money, it would decrease. We will not do it right away. We'll report it. We have a responsibility from the federal government to report it, but we will not adjust your level of assistance until your annual reevaluation, which we have to by law do 1 year. So what this does, it's not, I think it's a good change. It's not a game changer for the individual, but the way I look at it is, look, you either are doing well at your job and got a promotion, you got a raise, or you went out and got a second job. So take that money, report it, but take that money, save it, spend it, do what you want to do with it because you earned it, and we'll worry about increasing your voucher and your assistance, or decreasing your voucher and assistance, I should say, at your annual exam, whenever that is. Gives them the opportunity to take their money, do what they want with it without having to worry about their housing assistance being decreased right away. If they don't report change in the income and we find out, we put you on a repayment plan, though. So you're going to want to let us know. One minor item, cost of living adjustments for our seniors. A lot of folks on our HUD are on Social Security and our seniors, so every year they are subject to a long re-examination process to determine the adjustment based on COLA. And we usually, our office has to call them, have them send in forms, we send them forms. It's a really long and exhausting process if you're old, if you're elderly and you know, probably already stressed out from not receiving enough of the Social Security to begin with. So what we're doing is we are going to do that adjustment automatically in our office, and we'll just simply ask you to sign, verify that the information's correct, relieve a lot of the stress from the client, and we'll pick up the extra work. The last bullet point really keeps, it just emphasizes our focus on code enforcement, and I should say, when in 2016, there was no code enforcement office, as we know, but the HUD office had their code inspector who inspects HUD units in the city only. And believe it or not, even when the city did have a code office, those two departments did not talk to each other. So there was no software, there was no communication between the code enforcement department, who maybe was out in the neighborhoods doing what, not sure, but they were out there, I guess. They were not talking to the HUD inspector, which I think is pretty strange, being they're both in the same business in the same city. When we took office and erected the code office, we immediately put, after making person who was here when I arrived ended up leaving and I made that position full-time, we put him directly in communication daily with the code enforcement office, and they work together. We have our software, Municity, where they can see who is doing what all the time, live, and you can also see at any given time if an apartment has violations, and he knows that before we even place somebody in the program, or we even allow that apartment or landlord to participate in the program. And also, we made sure Oswego Police Department has that as well. Going back to what I said earlier, on the campaign trail, you knock on a door and the party house down the street, just because they have cookouts at noon, doesn't mean they're on HUD and they don't work. So I wanted to be able to tell people, and often the first question I ask when I get a code complaint is I ask him before I even take it to the code office, is it a HUD property? Because if it's a HUD property, we can be so much more effective because we control the money. And we also have hooked up the HUD office with OPD, so Nate can actually track how many calls to a HUD property. And if he sees so many in a certain amount of time, he can actually, we have the right to ask them for a counseling session and say, what's the problem? Why no charges have been filed, but no arrests have been made, but there seems to be a trend, and the police department is showing up at your residence 3, 4, 5 times a month. What's the problem? What's going on? Is somebody living here who shouldn't? Are cars coming in and leaving all the time? What's going on? So it gives us an avenue to really investigate and make sure that the program is helping people who truly need it and not causing problems in the neighborhood, because that's the last thing we want. So this communication, implementing that software, putting the inspector for HUD, the code enforcement office, and OPD all talking the same language on the same software, seeing the same information, has been a game changer for our code program and our HUD program. This takes it a slight step further. What this will do is it actually allows the city and the county to see each other's program. So what I sometimes get frustrated with is if a landlord is always failing city HUD inspections, why do they always pass county HUD inspections? How does that work? We've gone out of our way here by making the inspector full-time, updating our code, sharing information across 3 departments, increasing personnel to monitor our HUD office and the apartments and units in our HUD program. Yet we fail them all the time, but the county's passing them. How does that work? And even though it's on the county HUD program, we actually have county HUD vouchers in the city. So we want to hold county HUD vouchers to the same standard to lower disruptions, to make sure quality is adequate to the tenants, and ultimately everybody will be operating using the same language and using the same standard of living for clients on Section 8. So that's a change, and it's not just city and county. HUD at the federal level is working on a database that will allow municipalities to view participation of landlords in other cities as well. So if somebody operates a rental business in Fulton, and they buy a house and all of a sudden turn up in Oswego, although what we're seeing is actually the other way if you want to be in the HUD business. But we can already get almost like their background, their history, how they run their business. We can see that ahead of time, and we don't always have to allow them to participate in the HUD program. So I think that'll be, once the federal government implements it on their timeline and on their side of things, we're going to subscribe to that right away and be able to talk to other municipalities and get backgrounds on landlords and units. So there's some of the major changes. I would just like to thank Nate Emmons for all of his work. He came in at the end of December, or was it early January? And I don't know if you were a housing expert by any means, but and you got to go to some nice conferences in Florida and Texas, but you've really done a nice job settling in. The office is a great place, and I know that the staff there is doing a nice job. I really want to take a minute to thank Nate and thank Missy, Dee, Jen, who's the inspector? Chris. I always call him Joe. Yeah, right. So I just want to thank them for all their hard work. It's been a lot of change in a short period of time, changing offices, a new boss, new people coming into the office, the changes with this program. I've sat and talked with the staff quite a bit when we go over these programs. When we brought Nate in, we had a nice meeting, and I must say that it's not always easy to come in and change how a program is administered or to change the way people work. But this office in particular, you know, when we came in with these changes both in December and these changes here, they've really been receptive and open to new things and administering the program in different ways. So, and it's hard work. I stop in, I won't say frequently, but periodically, and there are always people in and out of the office. We're seeing movement on the ranking list, so we're actually getting to help the people we set out to help. You actually see the clientele walking in and out of the office is changing, and that's really, this office isn't always at the forefront, and I don't get to talk about it that often, but it's a real success story that I'm proud of, because 3 years ago this program in this office was in a completely different place. And I'm actually proud of the work we've done. So I will let you talk about maybe some not so fun things, or maybe I covered it all. I don't know.
You covered quite a bit of it, so I don't think Sure.
Is there a residency requirement? If they come in from Florida, okay, and want to jump into this program, can they get at it right away, or they got to wait a while?
So what happens, they can be placed on our waiting list. That's it's a federal regulation that we cannot deny somebody onto our waiting list, because HUD doesn't have those specific regulations. But HUD allows us to set up housing preferences, residency preferences, for example. And so somebody that's from Florida, for example, they can be placed on our waiting list, but they would be at that lower preference level. And other folks. What's that? Not from our office, unless they come to the top of the waiting list, which would probably...
Specific example.
Yeah.
If somebody came from Florida, was stopped by a trooper on 41, and this comes from a viable witness. And the trooper asked him, what are you doing up here? He says, I can get the welfare back here that I can in Florida. Now, the other point I want to draw here is that I've dealt with HUD and the city code enforcement. Above the doorway in the apartment complex, we went at one time, city said 6 inches above the doorway, smoke alarm. And I'll tell you, Jim Borden, who is the federal one, came in and said the ceiling, cathedral ceiling, put it 6 inches from the ceiling. Now this is in the same room where the city and the HUD inspector work. This is the problem, and that's what I hope you're curing this. Okay? Don't you think that's kind of crazy, putting one of the doors and one of 6 inches from the ceiling?
That seems a little odd, yes.
Odd? You should have doubled it too.
But to answer your question fully, you know, HUD, I think one of the song and dances that I think the mayor and I both have learned over the course of the past 9 months is that there are a lot of things that as a city we would like to do, and yet we have to balance that with HUD federal regulations. There are mandated regulations that we have to abide by. HUD will call them the must-haves, if you will, the things that we have to do, and there are things that we may do. And I think what you find in this document is we've spent a lot of time and effort to really comb through our policy to ensure that the must-haves, we are actually doing the must-haves, and we have the language to support it. We have the HUD regulations, the federal regulations cited in this document now that support the must-haves. And then we also have looked all of the mays that we can do to ensure that what we are deciding at the local level falls within the realm of what HUD allows us to do. So minimum rent's a good example of that. HUD doesn't require us to do a minimum rent, but it gives us a range that says if you want to charge a minimum rent, you can, and here's the range in which you can live within a certain policy. So that's what we've done with this document, is really ensured that we are following federal regulations. We have the legal terms, the references cited in this document that, to my estimation, makes it pretty ironclad in terms of what we've put forward. What we also have done is we have consulted with other folks in the field, experts in the field. We've had a fair housing officer review this entire document to ensure it's in compliance with fair housing laws. And so we've done a lot of due diligence in creating this document to ensure that it abides by not only our federal regulations, but allows us to do the things that we would like to do on the local level to ensure our program is very successful. Yeah, you have to be citizens. There's no question. Well, citizens, I mean, there's a process. Yeah, yeah. Permanent residency, some other things there. So you don't have to be a natural-born citizen to be on a federal program, no.
I just want you to know I'm glad you're helping the people out, okay?
We are too. And I think one of the things that is sometimes looked over is that this program generates about $2.5 million worth of revenue pumped into the local economy each and every year, which I think is, I mean, $2.5 million is not something to shake a stick at, really. It's a fair amount of money that's generated into the local economy. And I think that you could just, by the sheer size of this document, we have painstakingly ensured that our policies and procedures are well thought out, are well written out, and that this becomes a document that we can use day in and day out to ensure full compliance. So I'm not going to add too much. I mean, we're going to spend some time from a public perspective, allowing the public to digest this document before it can actually be approved by council. So there will be opportunity for folks to view it and review it prior to any sort of approval. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
That it? That's all I got.
You took all the time.
Is there any questions from council? Any questions? Okay, Miles, please address the chair.
Okay. Sorry.
At this time, I would like to get a motion to request a public hearing to review of the proposed updated administration plan for the rental assistance program. Councilor McVerity, Councilor Cordino.
Councilor Tesorero?
Yes.
Councilor Cordino?
Yes.
Councilor McBurdy?
Yes.
Is there any new business to come before this committee? I see none. Can I get a motion for adjournment? Councilor Cordino, Councilor McBurdy.
Councilor Tesorero?
Yes.
Councilor Cordino?
Yes.
Councilor McBurdy?
Yes.